Good evening and welcome back to The Curious Case. I'm Davis. Tell me, are you settling into the winter nights, or do you still miss the warmer days? And have you ever seen something outside your door that made you pause, just for a moment? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe. Tonight's mystery begins with a quiet lane, a cold dawn, and a silver lantern that should not have been there. Miss Marple stepped outside just after 8. Primrose Hollow lay quiet. The first frost had settled across the roofs. Light touched the chimneys in a soft way. Nothing harsh, just the start of another cold morning. She closed her gate carefully. Her steps were steady. She carried no hurry with her. That was her habit. Calm, measured, watching everything without seeming to. The cottages along the lane looked the same as always. Neat doors, fresh frost, curtains drawn back by early risers. Miss Marple nodded to herself. The village worked on a simple rhythm, slow, predictable, almost comforting. Across the green, Mr. Pottle swept his little path. He always swept in straight lines, never rushed, never missed an inch. He lifted his hand when he saw her, a small greeting. She returned it with equal smallness. At the bakery, warm air leaked through the vent. It mixed with the cold, a clear sign the ovens were already working. Miss Marple watched Mrs. Linton carry in a tray of dough. Routine, nothing unusual, nothing out of place. Down the road, the postboy unlocked his bicycle. He checked the tires. He checked the basket. He checked his gloves. He always checked everything twice. It was his habit. Miss Marple approved of that. Habits told the truth about people, more than words ever did. She passed the stone bridge. Frost clung to the railing. She touched it lightly. Cold, solid, reliable, just like Primrose Hollow liked to be. But she also noticed small things. She always did. A curtain that twitched too quickly. A window that had been opened then closed again. A cat that stared at something she could not see. Nothing large, just small notes in the morning air, the kind of notes most people never stop to hear. She walked on. She let her eyes drift over each doorstep, each hedge, each corner. People liked to think the village was quiet, but Miss Marple knew better. Quiet places held stories. You only had to wait long enough for them to come forward. At the far end of the lane she paused. A faint sound reached her. A door closing, not hurried, but not slow either. A careful kind of closing, as if someone didn't wish to be heard. She turned her head slightly, listening. No second sound followed, only the crunch of frost under her own shoes. Miss Marple continued her walk. She passed the Elwood cottage. Nothing unusual there either, just frost on the roof. A broom by the door, a pot of winter berries on the window shelf. She considered it for a moment. She did not know why. The village moved around her with soft steps. People beginning their day, people keeping to their routines, people behaving just as Primrose Hollow expected. And yet, something tugged at her mind, light, thin, like the edge of a thread. She walked on. She didn't rush. She didn't frown. She simply kept the thought with her. A quiet thought. One that would return later. The frost glittered. The morning stayed calm, and Miss Marple paused once more at the bend in the road. Someone was watching the lane. She felt it, not strongly, just enough to notice, just enough to know the day would not stay ordinary for long. Miss Marple had only just reached the turn toward the market when she heard quick steps behind her. Light steps, uneven steps. Someone in a hurry, but trying not to look like it. She turned slightly. Lydia Hartwell appeared at her side, cheeks pink, breath short, hands clasped tight in front of her. "Miss Marple, have you a moment?" Her voice wavered, not with fear, with something close to excitement, and something close to dread. Miss Marple gave a small nod. "I'm only walking." Her calm never changed. It helped people speak. It helped them settle their thoughts. Lydia glanced over her shoulder. Then again, a nervous habit. I don't know if I should say this out here. Her whisper cracked. Miss Marple waited. She never pushed. She let silence do the work. It's Margaret Elwood, Lydia said. She has something on her door, something strange. Miss Marple tilted her head. What kind of something? Lydia swallowed. A lantern, but not an ordinary one. It's silver, with a black ribbon tied to it. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed just a fraction. No alarm, just careful thought. A black ribbon? Her tone softened even further. Show me. Lydia exhaled in relief, as if she'd been waiting for those words. She turned toward the Elwood cottage. Miss Marple followed at an unhurried pace. They walked past the row of frost-touched hedges, past the bakery chimney, past the quiet windows of the tailor's shop. The village still moved at its gentle winter pace, but Lydia did not. Her steps were quick, restless. Her hands kept tugging at her gloves. Margaret didn't answer when I knocked, she murmured. I thought she might be unwell. Then I saw it, the lantern. It wasn't there last night. Miss Marple studied Lydia's face for a moment. Worry. Yes, but also confusion. Something more complicated. Something she wasn't saying. They reached the cottage gate. Frost lined its edges. Lydia stopped short. Miss Marple stepped closer. There it was, a small silver lantern, hung neatly at the center of Margaret Elwood's front door. Bright metal, cold to look at. A black ribbon tied around its handle, tied with care, tied by someone who wanted it to be noticed. Miss Marple leaned in. Her glasses caught the soft light. She didn't touch the lantern. She didn't need to. She simply observed. The ribbon was new. The knot was tight. The placement was deliberate. No wind would have placed it so neatly. No child would have tied it with such precision. Lydia whispered, "It looks like a warning." Her voice trembled again. Miss Marple did not answer immediately. She kept her eyes on the lantern, then on the doorframe, then on the frost in front of the threshold. No footprints, no smudges, no sign of a hasty visitor. But something else bothered her. Something small. Something almost easy to miss. She stepped back. Only a few inches, enough to take in the whole picture, enough to gather the silent details. Lydia shifted beside her. What do you think it means? Miss Marple kept her voice low. I think it means someone wished to be seen, but not found. Lydia blinked. Is that dangerous? Possibly, Miss Marple said. Her tone stayed gentle, calm, but firm enough to show she had formed a thought she didn't yet wish to share. She looked at the silver lantern once more. The black ribbon swayed slightly in the cold air. Barely a movement, but enough. Enough for her to know this was no decoration. Not at all. She turned her head down the lane. Someone had been here, someone careful, someone with intention. Something was wrong, and it was only beginning. Lydia raised her hand to knock, but she didn't reach the door. It swung open at once, suddenly, sharply, as if someone had been standing just behind it, listening. Margaret Elwood appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale, too pale for a cold morning. Her eyes were wide, unfocused for a second, then forced into something like calm. Her hands gripped the edges of the door, hard, tight, white-knuckled. "Oh," she breathed. "I didn't expect visitors." Lydia tried to smile. It came out uneven. "We only wanted to check on you. We saw this on your door." Margaret's gaze flicked to the silver lantern, only for a heartbeat, then away. Too fast, too practiced, as if she didn't dare look at it for too long. Miss Marple watched the movement carefully. People revealed more in what they avoided than what they said. Margaret pulled her cardigan close. "It's nothing," she said quickly. "Probably a joke. Children, perhaps, or someone being silly." Her voice trembled on the last word. Silly. Such an ordinary word. But her tone made it wrong, made it fragile. Lydia stepped forward. Margaret, if someone meant something unkind— No, Margaret snapped. The word was bright and sharp in the cold air. Then she softened it instantly. Forgive me. I'm only tired. It startled me, that's all. Miss Marple took a small step closer to the doorway. Not intrusive, just near enough to see the tiny details people missed. Margaret's hair was slightly disheveled, not the usual tidy morning style. Her slippers were damp, as if she had paced the floor. Her eyes kept drifting toward the lane. Then the window. Then the lane again. Not the lantern. Never the lantern. Fear circled her like a shadow she didn't know how to step away from. Miss Marple spoke gently. Did you see anyone place it, even from a distance? Margaret shook her head too quickly. No, no one at all. I only noticed when I opened the curtains. Her breath hitched, barely. But Miss Marple heard it. And you have no idea who might have done such a thing? Miss Marple's voice stayed steady, light, reassuring. Margaret swallowed hard. I've done nothing wrong, she whispered. Nothing. People talk, of course. People always talk. But I've never harmed anyone. No one had asked if she had. Miss Marple exchanged a brief look with Lydia. Lydia's eyes filled with worry. Margaret's filled with something else. Guilt. Or memory. Or both. A gust of cold air brushed past them. Margaret flinched as if touched. Her gaze shot again toward the lane. Please, she said softly. I'd rather not stand here in the open. She eased the door closer to her side. A small retreat. A small shield. Thank you for checking. I'm quite all right. Miss Marple did not argue. She simply inclined her head. Margaret closed the door, not abruptly, but with the care of someone trying not to draw attention. The latch clicked faintly. Lydia let out a slow breath. That wasn't normal, she whispered. Miss Marple kept her eyes on the frost near the doorstep. It held no footprints but theirs, not one sign of a visitor, not one sign of whoever placed the lantern. Normal? Miss Marple murmured. No, not at all. She turned her head slightly. Something unseen brushed the edge of her awareness. A presence, a thought, a possibility. Someone had been here, someone still nearby, and someone very dangerous, watching. Miss Marple made her way toward the florist shop. No rush, no outward concern, just her usual morning pace. The kind that never drew attention, yet missed nothing. The bell over the door chimed softly when she entered. Helen Dorridge looked up from a bundle of holly branches, neat apron, calm hands, a woman who liked order in her work. Morning, Miss Marple, she said. Cold one today. Miss Marple nodded. Yes, frost everywhere, and a few curiosities as well. Helen paused. Her scissors hovered above a sprig. Curiosities? Miss Marple looked over the counter. Wreaths, red ribbons, gold ties, everything cheerful, everything ordinary, nothing silver, nothing black. She lowered her voice slightly. I happened to see something on Margaret Elwood's door, a silver lantern with a black ribbon. Helen put the scissors down, slowly, as if the words required both hands free. I didn't make that, she said. Not a chance. Miss Marple studied her face. Honest surprise, but also something else. Recognition, perhaps. Helen shook her head firmly. I don't keep black ribbons in December, never have. People don't like them. They say it brings bad luck around Christmas. Miss Marple gave a tiny, thoughtful nod. A sensible custom. Helen crossed her arms. And I certainly didn't make a silver lantern. I don't even stock lanterns. Too delicate. Too breakable. Miss Marple reached toward a spool of ribbon on the shelf. Bright red. Festive. Nothing somber. Nothing grim. Curious, Miss Marple murmured, because whoever tied it used a black mourning ribbon. Quite new, quite intentional. Helen's face twitched, barely. But Miss Marple saw it. Helen hesitated, then leaned in slightly. Well, someone did come in last week, she admitted. Asked about black ribbons and black flowers. Strange request, really. I told them I didn't keep any. Miss Marple's attention sharpened. Someone? Helen nodded. I didn't know the person. Face partly covered. Quick manner. Didn't say their name. Didn't buy anything. She frowned. Asked if black ribbons had ever been used here in the parish. For messages, they said. Messages. Miss Marple folded that word into her thoughts. It sat there neatly, uncomfortable, purposeful. Did they mention Margaret Elwood? Miss Marple asked. No, Helen replied. But they seemed very interested in old customs, dark ones, things people don't talk about anymore. Miss Marple felt the thread tighten. Old customs, old warnings, old fears. Helen returned to her holly branches, though her hands shook slightly now. I didn't like the feeling they brought in with them. Cold, heavy, not right for Christmas. Miss Marple didn't comment on the tone. She didn't need to. The truth sat quietly between them. She thanked Helen, warmly, calmly, then stepped out into the cold air again. The frost felt sharper now, the village quieter, as if holding its breath. Someone had asked for black mourning ribbons. Someone had been studying old parish symbols. Someone had been planning this for longer than a day. Miss Marple closed her glove around her walking bag. Her steps slowed. Her mind did not. She walked down the lane with a soft expression, the kind that made people think she was admiring the winter morning. But she wasn't. She had more questions now, more pieces that didn't fit, and more suspicions settling around one single fact. Whoever tied that black ribbon wasn't finished. The commotion reached Miss Marple before she reached the high street. Raised voices, hurried footsteps, a door slamming somewhere. Primrose Hollow did not make noise without reason, not at this hour, not on a cold morning. She moved toward the sound, calm, measured, but attentive. Villagers gathered outside Margaret Elwood's cottage, coats half-buttoned, scarves pulled on without care, faces tight with worry. Lydia Hartwell spotted her at once. She hurried over. Miss Marple. She's gone. Margaret. They found her in her chair. Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on Lydia's arm. Take a breath, my dear. But Lydia couldn't. She shook her head instead. The cottage door stood open. Dr. Hemsley stood inside. Lean, stooped, pince-nez crooked from being put on too quickly. He wiped his brow with a handkerchief. She must have passed peacefully, he said to the small crowd. Heart, most likely. Sudden, quick. The villagers nodded slowly. They wanted to believe it. Peaceful. Sudden. Nothing frightening. Nothing dark. Miss Marple stepped forward. Hemsley saw her and sighed. I suppose you'll want to look, he muttered, but without annoyance. He knew her ways. He respected them, even when he didn't understand them. She entered quietly. The room smelled of ink and paper. Margaret Elwood's reading chair sat near the window. She rested there now. Still. Head tilted slightly, hands folded in her lap. A blanket had slipped to the floor. A mug sat untouched beside her. A book lay open on the table. Everything arranged neatly. Too neatly. Miss Marple lowered her gaze. Ink glistened on the wooden floorboards. A spill. A wide one. Fresh. Dark. But the ink bottle on the table was upright. Firmly closed. No drips. No signs of tipping. Nothing to explain the spill at all. Miss Marple leaned closer. The ink had spread in a strange pattern, not from a fall, more like it had been poured, intentionally, and then left to settle. She touched the edge of the spill with a gloved finger. Still tacky, still warm, recent. Hemsley stepped beside her. Must have been a nervous movement, he said. Perhaps she knocked something before she collapsed. Miss Marple's voice stayed soft. Collapsed people do not place bottles upright afterward. Hemsley blinked, looked again, frowned, but said nothing. Miss Marple studied the carpet edge. No signs of struggle. But Margaret's slippers were misplaced. One under the chair, one far to the right, as if she had risen, or tried to, or been moved. The window latch was unsteady, just barely, as if touched recently, as if someone had checked it, or opened it for a moment, then closed it again. Miss Marple's eyes drifted back to Margaret's face. Not peaceful, not exactly, more like a woman surprised, startled, stopped mid-thought. Behind her, Lydia sobbed quietly in the doorway. Hemsley patted her shoulder. "Natural," he repeated, "to be expected at her age." Miss Marple did not agree, but she said nothing yet. She walked slowly around the room, a thread on the floor, a cushion slightly out of place, a faint, unfamiliar scent. Not flowers, not tea, something sharper, almost medicinal. She paused at the ink again. A message, perhaps, or a mistake, or a sign someone had tried to hide something but did not know how. Outside, the villagers murmured, their voices carried in soft waves, fear, sadness, confusion. Miss Marple stepped back from the chair. She folded her hands neatly in front of her. This was no peaceful passing. Not to her eyes, not to her logic, not to any quiet instinct she trusted. She looked toward the door. Someone stood just beyond the crowd, still, watching. And in that moment, Miss Marple knew one thing with certainty. Margaret Elwood had not died alone. The villagers drifted away slowly. Whispers moved with them, soft, uneasy, the kind of whispers Primrose Hollow preferred not to have. Miss Marple stayed a moment longer at the edge of the path, not too close to the cottage, not too far either, just close enough to see what others had missed. The frost near the doorstep had changed, not much, just enough. A small patch disturbed, a faint smudge, nothing clear, nothing that would trouble most people. But trouble was not what Miss Marple waited for. Truth was. She stepped toward the door with careful, light movements. Her eyes followed the frame, the hinges, the narrow wood ledge beneath the lock. Then she stopped. A small intake of breath. Not surprise, recognition. The silver lantern was gone. No hook mark, no scratch, no trace of metal, as if it had never been there. Only one thing remained. A torn strip of black silk, hand-dyed, soft frayed edge, caught against a tiny splinter in the doorframe, almost invisible unless one looked for it. Miss Marple bent slowly. Age did not prevent accuracy. Her fingers closed over the silk. She lifted it with care. Black mourning silk. Not common, not cheap, not festive, not something used lightly in December. She pressed it between her gloved fingers. The dye had left a faint shadow. Whoever tore it had handled it recently. Very recently. Within hours, perhaps, maybe less. Lydia approached from behind, still pale. "Is that part of the ribbon?" Miss Marple did not answer right away. She turned the silk slightly. The tear was sharp on one side, but stretched on the other. A rushed movement, a pulled knot, a hasty removal. "No child removed the lantern," Miss Marple said quietly, "nor a prankster." Lydia stared at the empty door. But why take it away? Miss Marple kept her voice soft. To erase a sign, to hide a message, or to protect themselves from being connected to it. Lydia shivered. "Do you think it means something terrible?" Miss Marple folded the silk and slipped it into her small walking bag. The motion was discreet, almost invisible to anyone watching from a distance. "The meaning," she replied, "depends on the person who placed it there, and the person who feared it." She glanced down the lane again. The frost gleamed, still, cold, empty at first glance. But she knew better. Someone had passed through. Someone silent, someone careful, someone who had returned in the night. Lydia hugged her coat. "I don't like this. Margaret knew something. I could see it yesterday." Miss Marple nodded once, a small, thoughtful movement. She recognized the lantern, she said, or the ribbon, or the person who tied it. Lydia's breath caught. How can you tell? Miss Marple looked at the doorframe again, at the torn silk, at the faint scrape of metal left behind, at the untouched frost on the ground. Because someone came back to remove it, she said softly, and people only remove warnings when they still have something to hide. A gust moved down the lane, cold, sharp, carrying no sound except the rustle of bare branches. Miss Marple turned her head slightly, not toward Lydia, not toward the cottage, toward the direction of the old mill road, a narrow path, a quiet place. Someone was watching their work, calmly, patiently, from a distance, and they would return again, before this was over. Lydia insisted Miss Marple come inside for tea. She needed company. She needed steadiness. Miss Marple understood that well enough, so she agreed with a small nod. Inside, the house felt warm, quiet, safe in the way tidy rooms often were. Lydia moved about quickly, setting cups, warming the pot, fussing with spoons that didn't need fussing. Nervous habits again, strong ones. They're already talking, Lydia said, pouring tea with a shaking hand. Half the village. I heard Mrs. Pottle at the corner. She said Margaret must have had a warning, a sign. People say the lantern means something old, something from the parish records. Miss Marple lifted her cup. She didn't drink yet. She only listened. Lydia leaned closer. I know gossip is foolish, but it spread so fast. Everyone saw that ribbon. Everyone knows Margaret wasn't herself yesterday. Miss Marple nodded once. Yes. She was unsettled. Unsettled, Lydia repeated. No. She was terrified. I saw it the moment she opened her door, her eyes. She knew something that frightened her so badly she couldn't hide it. Miss Marple placed her cup down gently. You are right. She was afraid. Lydia's shoulders loosened a little. It was the lantern, wasn't it? That black ribbon. It must have meant something dreadful to her. Miss Marple kept her gaze steady, clear, kind but firm. No, my dear, not the lantern, not the ribbon. Lydia blinked. Then what frightened her? Miss Marple folded her hands together. She feared a person, not an object. Lydia stared. A person? Yes, Miss Marple said softly. Her fear was directed beyond the door, not at the lantern itself, as if she feared someone standing just out of sight. Lydia's breath caught. She sat back. The idea felt heavier than any symbol, heavier than gossip, more real, more dangerous. Miss Marple continued, her tone quiet. Margaret looked past us several times. She watched the lane. She checked the windows. Her eyes followed movement no one else noticed. Lydia shivered. Do you think she recognized who placed the lantern? Yes, Miss Marple said simply. I believe she did. Lydia wrapped her hands around her cup, for warmth, for grounding. It feels wrong, Miss Marple, all of it. The lantern disappearing, the silk ribbon, Margaret dying this morning. Everything feels wrong. Miss Marple gave a small nod. It is wrong, and people sense it, even if they don't know why. Lydia lowered her voice. I heard someone say the old mill path was busy last night, but no one saw who was there, only that someone walked it more than once. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed just slightly, barely a shift. I see. Lydia leaned closer again. Do you think whoever used that path came to Margaret's door? Miss Marple didn't answer right away. She watched the steam curling from her tea. Quiet. Thinking. Threading small details together one by one. Finally, she spoke. Someone entered the village after dark. Someone left before dawn. Someone who did not wish to be seen. Lydia swallowed. Do you think they'll return? Miss Marple's gaze lifted toward the window. The glass reflected the pale winter light. Beyond it, the village moved with forced calm. Few smiles, few steps taken without glancing over a shoulder. The village is uneasy, Miss Marple murmured. People feel the shift. It happens when fear takes root. Lydia nodded, frightened. Fear of what? Miss Marple answered softly. Fear of someone walking among us. The wind pressed lightly against the window pane. A faint sound, barely there, but enough to deepen the silence between them. Brimrose Hollow was changing, and not for the better. Miss Marple left Lydia's cottage in the early afternoon. The sky had not changed, still pale, still cold, still ordinary to anyone who did not look too closely. But Miss Marple was thinking of lanterns, thinking of ribbons, thinking of Margaret Elwood's frightened eyes, and thinking of one simple truth. Fear always had a history. She walked toward the church hall, quiet steps, no urgency, just her usual calm. Inside, the vestry door stood open. Reverend Ainsworth sorted papers at a small wooden desk. He looked up when she approached. Miss Marple, he said warmly. A sad morning, terribly sad. Yes, she agreed. May I ask you something? Of course. He adjusted his glasses, prepared for one of her gentle but precise questions. Do you recall, she said softly, the trouble with the library funds, years ago, a very long time ago? The Reverend paused, his hands stilled. His expression changed in that small, careful way people used when old stories resurfaced, stories they wished would stay buried. That was 1902, I believe, he murmured. Quite a dark little matter for the parish, even now. Miss Marple nodded kindly, and Margaret Elwood was involved. The Reverend exhaled slowly. Yes, she was the treasurer at the time, a dependable girl back then. Most trusted her. Some didn't, of course, but that is the way of things. What happened? Miss Marple asked. He pushed his papers aside. Money went missing, not a fortune, but enough to stir anger, enough to whisper about. Miss Marple tilted her head. Whispers can be worse than accusations. Yes, the Reverend agreed, and that is exactly what happened. No proof, no confession, only silence, and blame spreading in quiet corners. Miss Marple kept her eyes steady. Who suffered the most? The Reverend hesitated. Not Margaret, interestingly. She had family here, she stayed. It was the Rayborn family who bore the weight. The father worked with the fund as well. He insisted he was innocent. But suspicion followed him, followed his wife, and their child. Miss Marple nodded again. I recall hearing something, she said, a family leaving rather suddenly. Yes, the Reverend whispered. They packed their things one night, left before dawn, quiet departure, no announcement, no farewell tea, just gone, ruined by a matter no one fully understood. And was the money ever found? No, he said, not a penny. The scandal faded. People grew tired of talking, as they do, but the bitterness lingered. Miss Marple folded her hands. People do not forget humiliation, not easily. The Reverend gave a solemn nod, especially the young. Children remember, painfully sometimes. Miss Marple thanked him gently and stepped back outside. The cold air greeted her at once, sharp, still, holding its breath. She walked slowly down the path. Her mind worked through the details, lanterns, black ribbons, old grievances. Those threads belonged to the same cloth. They always did. Margaret Elwood had feared someone connected to the past, someone who knew the old scandal, someone who felt the wound more deeply than the village had ever realized. Miss Marple paused at the edge of the green. The frost glittered faintly. Voices drifted from nearby houses, light but uneasy. Brimrose Hollow sensed trouble, even if it could not name it. She touched the small walking bag at her arm. Inside it, the piece of black silk rested where she had placed it. Cold, quiet, heavy with meaning. History never stayed buried, not in a village like this, not when someone carried the memory like a knife. Miss Marple looked toward the old mill road. The past was returning, step by step. The cry rose just as dusk settled over Brimrose Hollow. Sharp, startled, carried across the green with that trembling edge the village rarely heard. Miss Marple was returning from the vicarage path when she stopped. Several people hurried toward the stone bridge, coats thrown on, voices low, faces pale. Fear spreads fastest in the evening, quieter streets, longer shadows. She could already feel it shifting the air. Lydia Hartwell spotted her and waved urgently. "Miss Marple, come quickly, it's happened again." Miss Marple followed without questions. Her steps were careful, her gaze steady. The pattern had already begun forming in her mind. Threads, meeting threads. One direction only. They reached the narrow lane where Thomas Larchwood lived. A small cottage, neat gate, clean path, always tidy. Thomas liked order. He liked control. He did not like surprises. But a surprise waited on his door. A silver lantern, exactly like Margaret Elwood's. Same size, same metal, same neat placement, and tied with a black mourning ribbon, hand-dyed, folded into a sharp, clean knot. A small crowd had already gathered. They kept their distance. No one dared touch it. No one dared step too close. Mrs. Pottle whispered, "Another one. Another warning. First Margaret. Now Thomas." Mr. Bradsley shook his head. "It can't mean anything good. Not with that ribbon." A younger man muttered, "Someone's playing with death." Miss Marple moved to the front quietly. She didn't touch the lantern. She didn't need to. She studied the ribbon, the edges, the knot, the way the metal sat flush against the wooden door. This was not carelessness. This was ritual, deliberate, controlled. Lydia's voice trembled beside her. "Thomas, was he involved too, in the old library trouble?" Miss Marple gave a small nod. "Yes, he was." The villagers turned sharply. Some muttered. Some stared. Some stepped back as if the scandal itself might cling to them. Thomas Larchwood pushed through the crowd then, drawn by the noise. His face tightened the moment he saw the lantern. Not confusion, not curiosity, recognition. Miss Marple caught that reaction in an instant. It confirmed what she suspected. This was not new to him, not unexpected, not meaningless. Thomas swallowed hard. Who did this? His voice cracked around the edges. No one answered. They all looked at Miss Marple instead, as if expecting her to name the culprit. But she only looked at the silver lantern again, calm, still, thinking. She asked a single question. "When did you leave your house last, Mr. Larchwood?" Thomas frowned. "After tea. Half an hour ago. It wasn't here then." Miss Marple nodded. "So it was placed very recently." A shiver moved through the crowd. Someone whispered, "They're here. Right now." The lantern swayed slightly in the cold breeze. The ribbon fluttered once. Just once. Miss Marple listened to the wind, listened to the silence behind it, listened for footsteps that might have slipped away toward the mill road. Nothing. But the absence of sound meant more than noise. Lydia's voice broke through the tension. "Miss Marple, what does it mean now?" Miss Marple spoke softly. "It means the first was no accident. It was a message. And this is the reply." Thomas stepped back. Fear settled into his features. Old fear, long carried, never spoken. Miss Marple rested her hand on her walking bag. Inside it, the torn silk she found at Margaret's door waited quietly. The match was undeniable now. She looked at the villagers, faces tight with dread, eyes darting from door to shadows, everyone sensing the same truth, even if they could not say it. "The pattern is clear," Miss Marple said gently, "and patterns do not stop on their own." The wind brushed past again. Soft, cold, warning. A second lantern meant a second danger, a second mark, a second step in a plan long prepared. Miss Marple turned her gaze toward the darkening lane. Somewhere out there, someone was moving with purpose, and a second death was coming. The news reached Miss Marple just as she reached her gate. A boy ran down the lane, breathless, red-faced, panicked. "Miss Marple, it's Mr. Larchwood, Behind his barn. They found him. She did not hurry. She did not freeze. She simply turned and followed the boy back down the path. Calm steps. Sharp mind. Her pace never changed, but her thoughts did. They sharpened, tightened, aligned. Villagers gathered near Thomas Larchwood's property, not close, not daring to. They stood in a loose half-circle, whispering in low, frightened tones. Some held their coats shut, some held their breath. Fear had its own weather. It had settled here now. Miss Marple approached the barn. The snow behind it was disturbed. Wide marks, uneven marks, struggle marks. Her eyes traced the patterns, not chaotic, not wild, calculated, quick. Thomas lay half on his side, half on his back. Snow clung to his sleeves. His scarf was twisted. His hat lay several feet away, one glove missing altogether. Dr. Hemsley knelt beside him with a grave face. He looked up when he saw Miss Marple. "It wasn't his heart," he said quietly. "Someone grabbed him, hard." Miss Marple's eyes settled on the marks on Thomas's neck. Clear lines, finger-shaped. Not an accident, not a stumble, not a sudden collapse. Force, deliberate force. She knelt slightly, keeping her balance with her cane. Thomas's face turned upward, frozen eyes, wide, staring at something only he had seen. Fear held there like a final imprint. "Poor soul," Miss Marple murmured. There was no surprise here. He expected this. Lydia appeared behind her. She gasped softly. "Oh, Miss Marple. First Margaret, now Thomas." Miss Marple looked at the snow near Thomas's boots. Two sets of impressions, one heavy, one lighter, then drag marks, then nothing. As if the second set vanished toward the mill road. She followed the line with her eyes, straight, purposeful, no weaving, no stumbling. Someone strong, someone practiced, someone who knew exactly what they wanted. A lantern sat on Thomas's door, a ribbon tied neatly. "Do you think the lantern caused this?" Miss Marple shook her head gently. "No, my dear. The lantern did not kill him. The lantern only marked him." She looked again at Thomas's frozen eyes. There was fear there, but something deeper too. Recognition. He had known his attacker, known the past that had returned for him. Miss Marple rose slowly, her knees stiff from the cold, but her mind clear, sharper with every breath of icy air. These deaths were not sudden, not random, not accidents. They were steps, measurements, old grievances being cleared away one by one. Someone was walking through Primrose Hollow, not seeking attention, only justice, their version of it. And someone was erasing old secrets, with unsettling, deliberate purpose. Miss Marple left the Larchwood cottage as the crowd thinned. People drifted home in uneasy silence. Doors closed too firmly. Curtains twitched. Whispers followed her down the lane. The village no longer walked with calm steps. It walked with fear. But her own steps did not change. They carried her toward the mill path. A narrow road, often empty, seldom discussed, used only by those who had reason to be alone. She knew who lived there. She had known since the vicar mentioned the Rayborn family. Old scandal, old blame, old wounds, and one family forced to leave in shame. Yet one member had returned. The path grew quieter as she walked. Trees gathered close, their branches bare, their shadows long. No sound, except her shoes on the frosted ground. The old mill came into view. It leaned slightly with age, stone darkened by years of wind and rain. A small cottage sat beside it, still, watchful, too quiet for comfort. Miss Marple approached the door. She didn't knock loudly, just a soft tap, enough for someone listening to hear, and someone was listening. The door opened at once, no pause, no hesitation, as if the person behind it had been waiting, expecting her. Gideon Rayborn stood there, thin, pale, hands shaking slightly, though he tried to hide it, eyes shadowed with something deeper than grief. recognition, worry, and a strange kind of acceptance. "Miss Marple," he whispered, not surprised, not curious, just resigned. "You shouldn't be here." Miss Marple offered a small, calm nod. "I believe we both know I should." Gideon swallowed. His gaze drifted past her, toward the village lanes, as if checking whether anyone else had followed. No one had. He seemed relieved, but only slightly. She studied him quietly. His coat hung loosely. His boots were damp, fresh mud along the edge, mud from the mill road, and perhaps from elsewhere. The snow outside his door had been disturbed, not by one set of steps, by two. "Were you expecting visitors?" she asked gently. "No," he said at once. But the word did not hold. Another truth pressed behind it, one he did not wish to release. She kept her tone warm. "I imagine it has been a difficult day." His breath caught. "You know about Thomas Larchwood?" "Yes." Her answer was soft, measured. "I was there." His hands tightened around the edge of the door. He did not ask how Thomas died. He already knew. He didn't ask who found the lantern on Thomas's door. He already knew that too. "Terrible things happen in this village," he whispered. "Terrible things that people pretend to forget." Miss Marple watched him closely. His fear was not fear of her, not fear of the villagers, not fear of the deaths. It was fear of memory. "You left Brimrose Hollow as a child," she said gently. "In 1902. He flinched, almost stepped back, almost closed the door. But something held him still. Perhaps the weight of years with no voice. Perhaps the burden of a truth never spoken. "My family was ruined," he whispered. "Shamed. Blamed for what we didn't do. Yet you returned," Miss Marple said. He looked away. "I had no choice." A curious answer, one carrying more meaning than he intended. Miss Marple's eyes drifted to his boots again. Snow clung to one side more heavily, as if he had knelt somewhere, or struggled, or hurried along a path few used at night. She tapped her cane lightly against the frost. A small, thoughtful sound. Not accusing. Not threatening. "Mr. Rayborn," she said softly, "what is it you fear will happen next?" Gideon looked at her then. Really looked. His eyes glistened with something sharp. Not sadness, not panic, knowledge. "Everything that should have happened," he whispered, "and everything that must." Miss Marple held his gaze, calm, steady, certain. He knew something, more than the villagers suspected, more than he wished to say, more than he could hide. And there, in the fading light, one quiet truth settled into Miss Marple's mind. Gideon Rayborn knew far more than he should, and far more than he wanted anyone else to discover. Gideon stepped back from the doorway just enough for Miss Marple to follow him inside. She entered quietly. The cottage held a thin chill. A kettle sat untouched on the stove. A single lamp flickered weakly in the corner. The room felt lived in, but tense. Gideon did not sit. He stood near the table, hands gripping the edge, breath uneven. "You came because of the deaths," he whispered. Miss Marple gave a small nod. "Yes, but also because of the past." Gideon closed his eyes. His shoulders sagged. He looked older in that moment, worn by years of something heavy, something unspoken. "It began in 1902, he said softly. "The library fund. Everyone remembers the whispers, even if they pretend not to." Miss Marple stayed silent, letting him speak. "The money disappeared. Not a large sum, but enough to matter, enough to shame someone, enough to break a family." His hands trembled, just slightly, but enough for Miss Marple to see. "3 people handled the fund," he continued. "Margaret Elwood, Thomas Larchwood, and my father." Miss Marple listened, steady, encouraging, not a single interruption. Gideon's voice cracked. "They blamed him. Everyone blamed him. He insisted he didn't take it. He begged them to listen, but no one wanted innocence. They wanted an answer. They wanted someone to point to. Yes, Miss Marple said gently. Villages do that, I'm afraid. Gideon nodded miserably. Margaret avoided questions. Thomas refused to speak at all, and my father, he faced the shame alone. A thin, broken breath slipped through him. We left at night. No goodbye, no kindness, no chance to defend ourselves. My mother cried the whole way down the road. Miss Marple remembered the Reverend's words. Children remember pain more sharply than adults. And you were a child, she said softly. Gideon nodded. Yes, too young to understand everything, old enough to feel it. He looked away, toward the small frosted window. Snowflakes drifted past, slow, quiet, the kind of snowfall that made the world seem gentle, except to someone carrying old wounds. We struggled for years, he said. My father never recovered. My mother grew bitter. I grew silent. Miss Marple watched him closely. His body spoke as loudly as his words. He carried tension like an old injury. He carried memory like a heavy coat. And then, she asked. Gideon swallowed hard. Then, as I grew older, I learned the truth. The library fund wasn't lost. It was taken, hidden. Someone used it. Someone profited from it. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Calm, controlled, focused. By whom? Her voice was gentle yet firm. Gideon met her gaze. Margaret Elwood and Thomas Larchwood both knew more than they ever admitted, but there was a third person involved, someone who kept records, someone who tore out pages, someone who let suspicion fall exactly where they wanted it. Miss Marple felt the shift, a small click, a piece of the puzzle sliding into place. Who? She asked softly. Gideon's voice dropped to a whisper. I cannot say it yet, but I know this. Someone else was guilty, and they let my family be destroyed. Miss Marple didn't move. She let the silence rest around them, heavy, telling. Your return to Primrose Hollow was not accidental, she said. It was not a question. Gideon's jaw tightened. No, I came back for answers, for truth. Miss Marple studied him. He was not lying, but he was hiding something else, something deeper, something dangerous. Mr. Rayborn, she said calmly, 2 people connected with the scandal are dead. That is not coincidence. Gideon flinched, a sharp, involuntary reaction. Guilt, fear, recognition. Miss Marple noted it carefully. If someone is striking out, she continued, they are following a list rooted in 1902. Gideon's breathing hitched. Maybe justice is finally coming, he whispered. Or maybe revenge has been waiting all this time. Miss Marple watched him closely, very closely. The shape of the truth was forming. Threads tightening around a name, a motive, a returning shadow. And she now saw the outline clearly. Revenge was no longer a suspicion. It was a pattern, a plan, a path someone had already chosen. The past crime was not done haunting Primrose Hollow, and someone was finishing it. The next morning arrived quietly, a still winter hush, thin frost along the hedges, a day that should have felt ordinary, but didn't. Primrose Hollow no longer trusted quiet mornings. Miss Marple stepped onto her front path and immediately noticed a man standing near the green. Tall, well-dressed, carrying a small suitcase, looking around with a kind of nervous interest. Not lost, just pretending to be. Lydia Hartwell appeared beside Miss Marple almost at once. She whispered, A stranger, Miss Marple. He came on the early coach. No one knows him. Miss Marple watched the man a moment longer. Strangers rarely arrived without purpose. Not after 2 deaths. Not now. When she approached him, the man straightened quickly, hat in hand, attempt at a polite smile. Good morning, he said. I'm Elias March. Margaret Elwood was my aunt. Miss Marple lifted a brow. Your aunt? She never mentioned a nephew. Elias gave a slight chuckle. Distant nephew, really. Second cousin. Family ties are a bit tangled. I came as soon as I heard. He said it smoothly. A little too smoothly. Miss Marple nodded very gently. May I ask how you heard? The village has no telegraph office. Elias hesitated. Just half a second. Barely noticeable, but noticeable enough. A friend wrote to me, he said. Yes, a friend. Someone passing through. Miss Marple gave a small, kind smile. I see. Her tone was soft, but her mind had already marked the inconsistency. Elias looked toward Margaret's cottage. I was very fond of her, you know. We spoke when we could. When did you last write to her? Miss Marple asked. Another hesitation, another small crack. Oh, recently, very recently. Only a few weeks ago. Miss Marple folded her hands. Margaret had failing eyesight, Mr. March. She rarely read letters without assistance. Did she mention yours to Lydia or Mrs. Pottle? Elias blinked, caught, unprepared. I don't know, he muttered. Perhaps not. Miss Marple nodded again, still gentle, still polite. What brings you to Primrose Hollow besides grief? He shifted his suitcase, looked uncomfortable, looked too eager to explain. Well, there are family matters, a will, papers, old belongings, things I should check. Miss Marple studied him calmly. Interesting, you already know there is a will. Well, I assumed, he said. Most people do not assume such things, Miss Marple replied lightly. Elias coughed, looked away. His gaze drifted toward Thomas Larchwood's cottage, too knowingly, too familiar. You seem to know the village layout well, Miss Marple remarked softly, for someone who has never been here. Elias froze, a tiny stiffness, barely seen, but Miss Marple saw everything. I studied a map, he said quickly. Of course you did, she replied. He continued. Margaret spoke of people here, Thomas Larchwood, Helen Dorridge, several others. Miss Marple folded this information neatly into her thoughts. Margaret had not spoken with many villagers in years, and certainly not at length. Elias was revealing knowledge he should not have. Lydia stepped closer, uneasy. Miss Marple, shall we fetch the constable? Miss Marple gave the slightest shake of her head. Not yet. Instead, she looked gently at Elias. So you came for a will, for belongings, for Margaret's affairs. Yet you know the names of those involved in the old library scandal. Elias's face twitched, a flicker, a break in his calm mask. That was a long time ago, he said quietly. Too long, but some debts remain, unpaid. Lydia gasped softly. Miss Marple did not. She simply watched Elias with steady eyes. He had come prepared with explanations. Too many, too polished, too quick, and he knew far too much about the victims, far more than any distant nephew should know. Miss Marple's thoughts tightened. The pieces shifted again, a new shape forming, a dangerous one. There was nothing accidental about Elias March's arrival, and he was not a stranger to the dead. Miss Marple waited until the village grew quiet again. People stayed indoors, shutters closed early. No one wished to speak of lanterns or deaths. Fear had made Primrose Hollow smaller. She wrapped her shawl tighter and walked toward St. Mildred's church. The vestry door was unlocked. It often was. The Reverend trusted the old walls more than he trusted locks. Inside, the shadows were soft, the air cool. Papers rustled faintly under a draught. Miss Marple walked to the parish chest, a sturdy wooden box, old, scratched, full of stories people wanted to forget. She lifted the lid gently. Inside lay the bound ledgers, year after year, neat handwriting, ink that had grown brown with time. She pulled out the ledger marked 1902. She opened it slowly. Calm hands, steady gaze. This book held the beginning of everything, and the reason two people were now dead. The first pages were normal, donations, Library expenses, notes about repairs and small improvements, routine matters. Then Miss Marple reached the section where the scandal should have been recorded. 2 pages had been torn out, cleanly, deliberately, not a careless rip, a precise removal. She ran a finger along the jagged edges. Someone had taken great care to erase the truth, decades ago, or perhaps more recently. She read the entries before the missing section. 3 names appeared repeatedly: Margaret Elwood, Thomas Larchwood, and Jonathan Rayborn. She studied each name quietly. She already knew what had happened with Margaret and Thomas. The village had whispered about them enough. But Jonathan Rayborn, his story had been buried. Miss Marple continued reading. The entries after the torn pages were just as revealing. Funds unsettled. Treasurer questioned. Meeting postponed. Trust compromised. A family departed under strain. No accusations written, but the meaning was clear. Jonathan Rayborn had been placed in the shadow of guilt. No trial, no proof, only the weight of suspicion. Miss Marple closed her eyes for a moment. She pictured a young child leaving the village in disgrace, a mother crying the whole journey, a father breaking under shame, and years later, someone returning. She opened her eyes again and studied the final entries. Fund recovered. Anonymous source. Parish matter closed. But there was no explanation, no accountability, no justice. The Rayborn name vanished after that mention, as if the family never existed. Miss Marple traced the missing pages again. Someone had stolen them to hide the truth. Someone who didn't want the scandal examined. Someone who benefited from silence. The silence lasted for decades, until lanterns began appearing, until deaths began happening, until the past walked back into Primrose Hollow. She closed the ledger carefully, placed it back in the chest, covered it as it had been before. As she stepped outside, the cold air met her with a sharp breath. Snowflakes drifted gently. A peaceful scene for anyone who didn't know better. But Miss Marple knew better. The truth was simple now. The Rayborn family had been wronged, destroyed by false accusations, driven out under the weight of lies, and someone who remembered every detail, had come back. Justice for a broken family, or revenge for a stolen childhood. Miss Marple stood on the church path. The village lights flickered in the distance. The wind carried a faint, uneasy whisper. Someone had returned to settle it. Lydia invited Miss Marple inside the moment she knocked. No hesitation, no small talk. Just worry in every movement. "Please," Lydia said softly, "tell me you've discovered something." Miss Marple removed her gloves carefully. She sat near the fire. Warmth helped thinking, though her thoughts were already well formed. "Yes," she said. "I believe I have." Lydia leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes anxious. She was ready to listen. Miss Marple began slowly, so Lydia could follow each step, so nothing would be missed. "First," she said, "the lanterns. 2 silver lanterns, both placed with precision, both tied with black hand-dyed silk." Lydia nodded, fear tightening her expression. "Yes, warnings." "Not warnings," Miss Marple corrected gently. "Markers, deliberate markers, placed only on the doors of those connected with the library scandal." Lydia swallowed. "Margaret and Thomas." "Exactly," Miss Marple said. "And both feared the lanterns. Not because of superstition, not because of symbols, because they recognized the meaning behind them." Lydia's voice dropped. "From the past." "Yes," Miss Marple continued. "The black ribbons were not holiday decor, they were mourning ribbons, mourning something lost, mourning someone ruined." Lydia shivered. But who would bring that back after all these years? "Someone who carried the memory," Miss Marple answered softly. "Someone who lived through the consequences." Lydia hesitated. "You mean the Rayborn family?" Miss Marple nodded. I saw the parish ledger. 2 pages missing. Pages that would have detailed exactly what happened in 1902. But we know enough. The fund disappeared. Margaret Elwood and Thomas Larchwood were involved, and Jonathan Rayborn was blamed. Lydia's breath shook. I remember the whispers when I was young, but I never knew the details. Most did not, Miss Marple said, because the village preferred forgetting. Forgetting is easier than admitting wrongdoing. She paused, letting the weight of the past settle between them. Then, she continued, 2 deaths occur, both victims tied to the scandal, both marked beforehand. Lydia nodded slowly. And the stranger, Elias March. He came too quickly, too conveniently. Yes, Miss Marple agreed. His story was thin, easily shaken. He knew names he should not know. He asked about wills too eagerly, and he wandered near places he claimed not to recognize. Lydia's eyes widened. Do you think he's the one placing the lanterns? Miss Marple didn't answer immediately. She folded her hands in her lap. Calm, certain. There are 2 returning men, she said quietly. Elias March and Gideon Rayborn. Lydia whispered. Gideon seemed frightened. He is frightened, Miss Marple said, but fear does not mean innocence. It can mean memory, it can mean guilt, and it can mean recognition. Lydia leaned closer. Of what? Of the pattern, Miss Marple replied. The lanterns, the black silk, the chosen victims, none of it random. She spoke slowly, with clear logic. Someone believes justice comes late, but comes. Lydia covered her mouth with her hand. Miss Marple, who would do this? Who would plan such careful steps? Who would hold on to a childhood wound for so long? Miss Marple looked toward the window. The winter light was dim now, the village almost still, almost silent. There is only one name, she said softly. One name that fits every thread, one name tied to the scandal, one name shaped by the ruin of 1902. She turned back to Lydia. Her voice remained gentle, her words steady. The answer is clear. But she did not speak the name yet, not here, not now. Instead, she gave Lydia a calm, warning look. Prepare yourself, Miss Marple whispered. The truth is very close, and only one name fits the puzzle. Miss Marple stood in the sitting room of Lydia's cottage, the constable beside her. Villagers gathered tightly. Gideon Rayborn pale near the wall, Elias March standing stiffly, eyes darting toward the door. She began gently. The lanterns, the black ribbons, the chosen victims, all pointed to the past. The Rayborn family suffered most in 1902, driven out, ruined. Elias shifted. Miss Marple continued. You are not Margaret's nephew, Mr. March. You are Jonathan Rayborn's son, the child who left in disgrace. Elias froze. Color drained from his face. Margaret and Thomas knew who took the library funds, Miss Marple said softly. They hid it. They let your father take the blame. The room held its breath. The lantern was your symbol, she finished. A warning, a mark of old justice. Elias swayed. The truth lay bare now. Primrose Hollow exhaled, slowly. Primrose Hollow settled again. Lights glowed softly behind frosted windows, doors closed with calm hands, not trembling ones. Miss Marple walked the lane in her quiet way. The village felt lighter, safer, grateful. At her gate she paused. Snow drifted gently across the path. She smiled faintly and whispered, Secrets sleep long, but never forever. Grace returned to the village. Warmth, too, and tomorrow evening, as always, another mystery would wait.